Hi everyone, today you're watching man carrying fantasy. Psych, it's over. It's so over, bro. You like your little stories about kings and queens each other? Too bad. It's time to eat your government-mandated Netflix true crime slop. What happened? How did we get from this to this? Sorry, this blank screen is a visual representation of the 9th and 10th episodes of House of the Dragon Season 2. Why? Because they don't exist. Because of reasons I will get to later in this video that you're watching exactly right now. Shows canceled, stars dropping out, mean words spoken, and viewership plummeting. I mean, it's hard to remember that it wasn't always like this. There once was a beautiful moment in television, a moment called 2015. If you're like me, you've been witness to an exciting time in the fantasy genre. They're calling it the fantasy boom. With the unexpected rise of Game of Thrones, TV networks and streamers got wise to the fact that fantasy is an awesome genre, and that it can work very well in serialized form. But with every boom comes a bust. No, I said bust. Thank you. And while I don't think we're fully at that point, we're definitely on our way. There is a culprit here, and no, it isn't that Game of Thrones shat the bed in its final season. A season so bad even I know what happens in it. I haven't even watched the show. I just started reading the books this month because I'm addicted to showing up late to parties. The point is, it stank, and since then, streaming services have been hunting for the next big fantasy show. But not just a fantasy show, oh no. And here's the first part of the problem. Game of Thrones raised the bar a little too high, not in terms of quality, but success. Network executives, instead of looking for a sustainable, long-term solution, wanted the white whale, the next Game of Thrones. We had some early contenders. I'd say roughly 4, but not all of them could be the chosen one. Let's go through them right now on Who Wants to Be the Next Game of Thrones? Contestant number 1. In my mind, Wheel of Time was the fantasy fans' adaptation. Beloved source material, long neglected, getting the high-budget Amazon treatment with a genuine movie star. There's a million books, and it is finished. Part Lord of the Rings, part Dune, and entirely insane. Kind of a logical choice for an unmined IP. Contestant number 2. The Witcher had the star appeal and the Netflix branding, and also went for Game of Thrones' dark tone, and already had a successful video game adaptation. I always had a sense that this had the most going for it. Contestant number 3. Amazon's massive gamble. After purchasing the rights to The Lord of the Rings for something like $100 billion trillion Jeff Bezos was challenging the gods with a show almost too big to fail. It had to work, right? I mean, it cost the most, but there were promising signs too, like unknown showrunners who were reportedly Tolkien obsessives. To me, this was the riskiest, but it had the most potential. Contestant number 4. Finally, HBO's answer to the vacuum they created. They had a million George R.R. Martin stories in the works, but this took precedent. This was another gamble in a way, you know, betting millions of dollars that there was still goodwill toward this IP. That's the question, huh? So there they are, you know, the 4 contestants. Let's see who the winner is! The next Game of Thrones is... I'm drawing this out so much because you know the answer. Everyone knows the answer. It was Rings of Power! Just kidding. It was none of them. So no fantasy show has reached the critical and popular heights of Game of Thrones, but has any show really? I mean, that's the thing, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but in the year 2024, it's starting to feel like that era of TV is gone forever. Part 2. To understand the broader death of fantasy TV, let's look back at our contestants and see how they fared. Wheel of Time wasn't the worst case scenario. Some people really love it, and it certainly got better in the 2nd season. I have my own opinions if you've got an hour to spare. The problem with dissecting a TV show over something like a novel is that so many external factors go into the success or failure of a project. Was it clumsy writing and a rushed pace, or did Amazon simply demand fewer episodes and crunch the budget? People underestimate how many useless executives just stand around and make dumb decisions all day. Yeah, Wheel of Time feels rushed, it looks like a CW show, and huge mistakes were made, but it generally captures the feel of the books. Generally. Then why didn't it reach that level of Game of Thrones? In Zach Barron's GQ article on the making of the show, he writes, "For the first season of Thrones, HBO spent about $6 million an episode, a number that steadily climbed from there. Amazon and the Wheel of Time, they're starting at upward of a reported $10 million per episode. Simply put, expectations for fantasy have changed. This isn't the days of Merlin anymore. The budget is going to effects, actors, locations. Each episode needs to feel like a movie. As a result, we get shorter and shorter seasons. These are hefty books, and to put even one of these things into 8 episodes is pushing it. The result is a rushed pace, convoluted plotting, and characters we don't have time to care about. Do you guys really think they'd give 14 seasons to cover this 14-book series? I'd be surprised if we got anything past 3. The Witcher is a show I honestly never cared about. I mean, I'm happy it has fans, but it seemed like from the start it was a mixed bag. Fans of the book were angry over choices in the adaptation, and it sounds like the angry fans included the star of the show, Henry Cavill himself, who exited the series under mysterious circumstances to be replaced by Liam Hemsworth for the 3rd and 4th season. It seems like the star power wasn't enough to keep this show popular. I think it had good numbers for sure, but it wasn't water cooler TV. Which brings us to Rings of Power's lackluster everything. Only about half as many US households watched the season 2 premiere as did the series opener over their first 3 days of release. The first season cost $715 million, and even though the second season is doing well by Amazon standards, it isn't capturing viewers' attention. Only 37% of viewers in the US watched season 1 to completion. The fact that they're losing viewers in season 2 is a bad sign. You know, I could talk a lot about why this show doesn't work, but mainly I want to ask, who is this for? Tolkien fans are horrified by the huge lore changes, and casual fans are bored to death by the almost Wikipedia-style storytelling. Amazon can only adapt stuff in The Lord of the Rings, but everything in this show is told in more depth in The Silmarillion, a property they don't even own. Also, Amazon put all their faith into virtually untested showrunners, who themselves admit that making the show was a massive learning experience. At one point, the showrunners asked mentor and former boss J.J. Abrams to call Amazon to put in a good word, which kind of makes sense. The show suffers incredibly from a storytelling tactic called the mystery box, which has been championed by J.J. Abrams over the years. Basically, you give the audience a mystery to be answered, even if it's something simple, and you run with it. Doesn't even matter what the mystery is. Rings of Power has quite a few. Mainly, is that Sauron? Is that Sauron? Is that Sauron? Is that Sauron? You get the point. If you want an extensive breakdown and a great video about this show, Hello Future Me has the king of them all. Let's bring it all back home to HBO, or I guess Max now. Even though I never watched Game of Thrones, I've become a huge fan of House of the Dragon. The first season was beautiful and tragic, and Paddy Considine gave the performance of a lifetime. It seemed like it was pretty popular, but then season 2 arrived and the cracks started to show. The slow but steady pace has become glacial. Repetitive scenes, plot conveniences, and a lack of forward momentum made for a season that felt like filler. Yeah, there were great moments, but by the end it felt like nothing had meaningfully changed. On top of that, George R.R. Martin disavowed the direction of the show on a now deleted blog post. So what's going on? Did the writers just suddenly lose their talent? Or did the corporate people do something? Yeah, it was the corporate people. Warner Brothers Discovery, under the reign of David Zaslav, is suffering tremendously and is forced to slash budgets left and right. It's hard, everyone's suffering, except David Zaslav himself, who made $49 million last year. Because of budget cuts and the actors and writers' strikes, the show was forced to cut the last 2 episodes, which would have included very climactic battles. This is why the season feels just kind of unfinished. But don't worry, we'll get to see the rest of it very soon in 2026. Let's stop for a second and make some conclusions. These 4 shows have been interesting case studies to see how an industry attempts to recreate an anomaly. First, you get a well-known IP. Then, you throw money at it. The end. The decline of high-budget adult fantasy TV isn't just because of the fantasy genre, it's because of TV itself. The streaming service model, which revolutionized the industry, is now killing it. Here's the secret. Streaming was never profitable. It was propped up by novelty, by big tech's willingness to destroy yet another industry with the promise of something better, only to give you a worse version of what you already had. It's like Uber and rideshare apps. What if we made taxis, but it's just random independent contractors using their own vehicles making next to nothing? Uber lost money in order to destroy an existing business model. Similarly, streaming destroyed a profitable business model in order to make a worse product. How many 22 episode series do you see anymore? I mean, I could go on forever about this. I made a video going deeper into this topic already. I'll just say that fantasy is in the crosshairs in this new era. Let's call this era the reality check era. In the reality check, streamers are raising prices, increasing ads, and focusing on cheap to produce content, such as reality TV. Basically, it's becoming network TV again. And fantasy never really thrived in that landscape. Fantasy, as we've come to expect it, is expensive as shit to produce. If you want movie quality dragons, don't expect much more than 6 or 8 episodes. And if these fantasy shows aren't bringing prestige or huge viewerships, then what's the point from a business perspective? You're already seeing this attitude shift. HBO forcing their flagship series to cut 2 episodes because of budget is crazy. Similarly, The Witcher's ending after its 4th season, if not sooner. In the near future, only proven IPs will be gracing the small screen, no matter how needless and unwanted. There's no longer the same money or energy to create game-changing fantasy. When Game of Thrones came out, it was different and fresh, just like many of the shows of that golden era. The business is going back to normal, and fantasy was never really welcome in that time. So what do we do now? I love fantasy as a genre, and I think TV is a perfect way to adapt fantasy novels, which are often long as hell. Perhaps we find a way to make fantasy cheap to make. Even though animation isn't particularly cheap, it's cheaper than any of these shows and seems like an obvious avenue. If my beloved Stormlight Archive got adapted as an animated series, I would be happy. Moral of the story, fantasy, it's not your fault. I love you, fantasy. And if you aren't destined to stay on the small screen, at least we'll see you on the big one, probably. And in books, of course. But books are not a visual medium. What is a visual medium? Photography. And what is my new favorite hobby? Photography. Even though I am only a novice at photography, and I am still the master of Transitions. In outdoor photography, see, shoot, and share the beauty around you by Min T. I've been exploring photography through a lens I've never seen through. Enjoying the wordplay? And it's only one of a number of great classes I've been exploring on Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare offers learning paths, which are curated sequential class collections for mastering a specific skill. There's so many fun avenues to take. You know, there's categories in film, illustration, animation. I've been having a fun time just re-exploring my old hobbies like photography and learning a bit more and just having fun going through the catalog. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. That's a free trial! That's cool! Get started today! Don't miss out! Thank you for watching, everyone. I put a lot of effort into these longer videos, so I appreciate you. These are our loyal patrons, many of whom are brand new now that I started reading Game of Thrones and vlogging it. $2 for everything on the Patreon. Anyways, just wanted to say that and thank the patrons. Thank you, Skillshare, and thank you, the viewer, for being there for me, parasocially. I hope you are happy and loved in your life and have a very lovely day. Bye-bye.